Calvin, welcome to Talk Python to me. It's great
Hey,
to
Michael.
finally have you on the show. What have you been doing all this time?
I don't know, not being on your show, I guess. I actually was super excited when you asked if I could be on here because this has been like a life goal. Well, at least a
Oh,
goal since Talk Python to me has ever existed.
I really appreciate that. That's very kind. Well, it's great to have you on here. And I am all about DevOps and deployment these days. I think it's another superpower that I think people can really have. You know, you've got an idea. You want to deploy the dream, as the song that we'll play later will say. And you know, if you're not familiar with this stuff, it's a huge roadblock. You're like, oh, I built this thing, but how do I get it up there, and how could I keep it running? You know?
Yeah.
And so what we're going to talk about is a framework you all have created to make this much more automated and easy and packaged up, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, part of the developer experience, not just the deployment story, but how do I make a developer be productive from day one? Like I get super obsessed about the experience. Like, is it smooth? Is it easy? Can developers like join your organization and be productive right away? Like that's important to me as a owner of a business who produces software.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start there. Who are you? What is your business? What do you do? Set the stage for everyone.
All right. So my name's Calvin Hendryx-Parker. I am CTO and co-founder of 6 Feet Up. We are a Python and AI for good software agency based out of the Midwest here in Indiana. But we have folks all across the country and a few folks across the globe. We help impactful tech leaders level up their game. Like if you've got an idea and you can see the future, part of our goal is to make that happen. Like we love tackling the super hard software problems. The harder, the better, and the more unique and the more impactful, the better. Part of our goal has been to do 100 impactful projects by 2033, and those impactful projects are things that are making the world a better place. So some of our projects do actually impact, climate or energy.
Awesome.
Done some stuff with NASA on space travel. So it's cool stuff like that the people who work at 6 Feet Up get super excited about, and like part of what drives me to do what we do every day, for sure.
Yeah, and to get to work on space travel is,
oh man,
it's like I'm getting up early today.
It's literally rocket science. Literally rocket science.
Yeah, how amazing! And you've been doing Python for a long time. You've been involved since the early days, right?
Yeah, I first touched Python in literally the year 2000. I started working
Really?
for I was in a startup in the Bay Area, and the guy sitting next to me was like, check out this Python-based application server called Zope. And at that point in time in my life, I just graduated college, and I think I understood the 3 words in between all the other words that he just said. And so that was a whole new world that got opened up to me. And so I started out my journey in Python really with Zope as the kind of the first thing that got me in. But back in that day, like Zope and BitTorrent were kind of the killer apps for Python. If folks remember, there were like Zope tracks at PyCon, and
Wow.
keynotes were like around Zope. It was the thing, and I still attribute that community to really bringing me into Python and getting me engaged. It's some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, who are part of that open source community who made that a thing. And I'm still friends with those people today. People like Paul Everett and Trace Seaver, and those folks were really part of my upbringing into the Python community. And I can't thank them enough.
That's awesome. There's a really interesting fact that was shown, at least amongst survey respondents in the PSF JetBrains survey, speaking of Paul Everett, that I would say 40% of the people who are doing Python these days are 2 years or less into it.
Wow.
Which is an incredible statistic. I think 30% or so this is their first year, and then the rest is the second year. So we're amongst the rare birds. But the reason I bring that up is
25 years later, we're still here doing it.
Exactly. The reason I bring that up is I suspect people who have been at this for 3 or 4 years maybe don't know what Zope is. They probably heard the word, but they're like, yeah. Is that like a thing that Django does? Like, tell people what Zope is real quick.
I mean, the application framework space back in the 2000s was not a crowded space. There weren't many options, and I think the beauty of what the Zope was an application framework. it had some interesting opinions. One of them being the ZODB, which I still do love to this day, which is an object graph database that enabled you to build applications quickly. And I think initially one of their goals was like through the web, even like if you remember Z classes, like you could build and rapid prototype through the web, in your browser. I mean, this is the year 2000. This is not last year, like where people were like, wow, cool, there's this low code thing. Like this was that 25 years ago.
This was ahead of its time.
It's way ahead of its time. Now, granted, I don't think that was not the future. That shouldn't be the future. I'm actually hoping to give some conference talks this year about low code, no code, and my opinions on that. Especially, actually, I should frame it in my context of Zope and Z classes, but maybe that's too much of an inside joke. I don't know if enough people would even understand what I'm talking about there, because, like you said, like so many people are new to the community, which I think is awesome. I think that shows it's a vibrant, growing community. If you're in a community and you're wondering or worrying where the new next generation is going to come from, there's a problem, and I don't think Python has that problem. The Python has an incredible traction with new people. And I've always loved it because of the simplicity. I love it because the language is predictable in its patterns. Like it's not a cognitive overhead to remember all the various ways to call things in Python, because typically they're pretty consistent.
Yeah, but Python's slow. We can't use it for stuff. I do not believe that for a second.
No,
I think if you're doing maybe mathematical simulations or certain types of really, really intense low level things, maybe, but as a general application framework, it flies. It's fine.
Yeah, well, and that's the problem too, is that with if you go off right now and you ask your ChatGPT or your Claude about, like, maybe what are some disadvantages of Python, it's going to mention these kind of broad old opinions about it, because it only knows the average of all the knowledge that's ever been on the internet. And I think that's why,
and it's learned a bunch of like trash talk as well.
Exactly, and which is mostly inaccurate. But if you ask it to dig deeper, and someday we'll be able to ask it to think a little more critically, you probably dig in and get the truth.
Yeah. Bit of a side note, I recently, for a couple of things I needed, got the ChatGPT Pro, not the paid version, but the insane Pro version.
Oh, the $200.
Yeah, like $200 a month, and I laughed at myself, like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done, but I need it, so I'm going to do it for a few days. Turn off. It's incredible. I'm not turning off. It's real. Like my side buddy. I can ask anything, and it is so good. the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed.
It's not evenly distributed because I think it's hard for most folks to have the right mindset, I think, to approach to get that level get that level of value out of it. I think you have to know how to talk to it. And I've said this before. It's the same problem with people who aren't good at using Google, just plain old search. Like, the people who have to say, let me Google that for you, are the ones who understand how to like use the search engine, well. Some people,
that can be answered in an exact phrase if you just say the phrase. Just say the phrase. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's also a mindset, right? Like I started thinking, like, instead of this is a cost or something, like this is like another employee that I can just give jobs, and 5 minutes later I'll come back and it's done pretty thorough research.
Especially with the new scheduling feature where you can actually schedule tasks to happen. I'm getting kind of excited about it. Everyone's talking about agents, and I know this isn't the AI show we're here to talk about, but I think agents are interesting, but we're not there yet. No. They're about the level of maybe interns and what you would trust them to do for you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a little worried about what all this stuff is going to do to the industry in the broad sense. My main concern is I think it'll sort of carve out that gap between early dev and senior dev, and it's going to be harder for folks to cross that.
Yeah,
but it's also an incredible technology, and I think it's also silly to pretend it doesn't exist. So anyway, you're right. It's not the AI show, but boy, is it top of mind for a lot of us, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk Python deployment. Let's talk some pitfalls, maybe a little bit of Docker. How's this?
It's interesting.
Why did you all attack this problem? And I guess setting the stage is where does this fit in your consulting story, right? You must need to deliver these applications often in a way that people can continue to keep them going on their own without you constantly going back. Yeah, there's some pip updates, so we'll take care of that for you.
Well, and that definitely reaches into the longer tail of the whole story. But I think if you go back to the beginning of the story of deployment, like a lot of us started out, or a lot of us older more seasoned veteran developer folks, in a world where if you wanted to deploy your web application, you threw some PHP into a web root, and as long as you had mod PHP installed, the stuff ran. Like you didn't have to think about configuring ingress and egress routes, and it was databases just ran on the same server you were on, so you just ran it on localhost. Like it's the world has changed when it comes to the deployment story, but it's because things have gotten more complex and sophisticated because they had to.
Yeah.
Like we had needs for more sophisticated authentication mechanism. We have needs for caching and delivery. We have needs for time series data. Because those opportunities opened up, more sophisticated software gets built, which means it's a little trickier to deploy.
Well, looking back and with your perspective of all this experience as well, something I've seen. Every time the technology gets easier to work with, like that used to be 100 lines of code. Now it's 3. Like, well, we're going to be out of jobs soon. A lot of people would say it's like, no, we're just going to solve bigger, more ambitious problems. And that's been the case for so long. And it's not that, well, things got easier, so we're not going to do it. It's no, every time it got easier, we were able to just think of bigger, more, instead of, we don't need a team. One person can solve this amazing problem. But that means underneath that, there's this mountain, this iceberg of stuff going on, right?
Well, and that's what I think that's where deployment has gotten, I think, hard in a lot of people's minds, is because there is a mountain of knowledge, like as a giant shoulders that you're standing on, that makes that happen. And my VP of engineering was complaining to me yesterday, like, how can we not easily put websites on the internet anymore? And it's not that we can't put websites on the internet anymore. They just do so much for us. Like the complexity and the sophistication under the covers is what's causing a lot of this issues. And the person who wrote software is not always the person who deploys software, because I think they've just got kind of different mindsets or different ways of thinking about the problems. And it's rare you find people who are truly the full stack, can do front end to the back end, to the database, to the network, to all the layers that are in between. And it's nice that services like the cloud have come about, where it greatly simplifies that deployment. I mean, that was part of our journey into containers. I was resistant to containers probably until 2020, when we did. In 2020, there was a change. Obviously, some things happened in the world, but we also built
more time to be at home and think about stuff.
Right. But we also had time to build some software to help us empower a little conference we were doing. We put on the Python Web Conference during the pandemic. We actually started it pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic, we took time to write some software to deploy a virtual event platform. And I think containers, at that point in time, I adopted containers and container orchestration because it allowed the developers to think more about developing and less about the deploying part of a sophisticated application like streaming web video, audio mixing, switching, live chats, and WebSockets. I mean, there were a whole lot of moving parts in something when you're delivering a live video conference experience. And the containers were a nice equalizing layer to allow us to say, I don't care where it goes to, whether it's in Docker Compose or Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, or in our case, we used Amazon's Fargate because I just didn't want to deal with infrastructure. I just told Fargate, I got some tasks, here's some containers, make them live, turn them on.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's for devs as well.
Yeah, and we do
not just the infrastructure you're deploying to, but it sounds like you're smoothing the path for the whole team, right?
Correct. That's an opinion I hold, that containers are for development as well. Like that developer experience. Some organizations I've seen, they may be deploying on the Kubernetes because there were operational opinions about deploying into containers, but the developers themselves haven't adopted that fully on their local workstation because it may feel hard until you've got that muscle built up for doing that level of development. That's why Scaff came about, is to make that development experience just a breeze. Like
Sure.
we focused on how quickly can a developer be productive locally using containers and still have all your tools. Like it shouldn't feel different than if you were developing with your local Django files on your local file system and you were just running a Postgres instance, out of Homebrew. Except it's better because now the versions will match what's running in production, and you can have 5 different projects running with 5 different versions of things because you want to make sure they match your expectations when they go to launch, and not be surprised when the version of Redis doesn't support some new operator because you're one minor version off in your local machine compared to the sandbox and production machines.
Yeah. I was not against containers, but I was resistant to use them myself because I felt like, well, here's another thing to understand, another thing that's a layer of between me and my code, and it could go wrong, and I don't need it. And you know what? I'm a believer. It is so nice to be able to just say, here's 3 commands you can run.
Exactly.
It's always going to be exactly. And another thing that I've done is on my new Macs and stuff, my dev machines, I don't put databases on there.
Nope.
No caching.
Same.
I don't even necessarily install Python directly on, as in go to python.org or Homebrew or something like that. It's, if I want a tool and instead of installing, say, MongoDB, I can just have a Docker command that runs MongoDB that listens on the same port.
Yep.
And it's always up to date. And if I don't like it, I get rid of it. If I want to change the version of it, I just change a flag somewhere in a file, and it's incredible.
Well,
that in UV.
Think back to the old days, and the old days for us, but probably the current state for a lot of people in certain organizations, is you had a large getting started document that you would have to follow top to bottom. Make sure you get this version of that. Make sure you get that version of this. Make sure you put these files there. Make sure your database is running with these couple extra options because we've enabled some. Maybe we've enabled GIS or some extension to the database. And if you didn't get all those magic incantations just right and follow the document to the letter, you were having a long time to get started. Like it was a struggle. Whereas you just tell someone git pull, and then tilt up in our case for Scaff, we've adopted the tilt management tool. They're running and they can start making contributing code within an hour. That's my goal. My goal has always been fresh laptop out of the box on my desk and be able to contribute like a pull request in an hour would be like the ultimate goal.
Excellent. Yeah, that's pretty excellent. So when you guys are doing development, do you actually do development in containers, or do you just use them to support all of your stuff?
No, everything's in containers. That was like Scaff primarily. I mean, some people will see Scaff as a deployment tool. I see Scaff as a developer experience tool and a deployment tool. It covers both ends of that spectrum because everything starts obviously with the developer and an idea and building some software. Well, if they can't build the software easily or they can't collaborate with another contributor on that software, it slows things down. So part of what we, that Scaff tool is it's going to be able to give you the scaffolding to build out an initial project, like starting from scratch. You have nothing on the file system. Scaff will build out those initial tools, but then Scaff is a set of opinions. More importantly, because lots of scaffolding tools exist out there. I mean, its current Scaff is built on cookie cutter, but we're we can move that. We can move those opinions as we change our opinions about the development world. So as we build a new project and let that get started, we now can develop locally on containers. Like we use Kind for our Kubernetes cluster locally, which is nice. You'd think running Kubernetes might be overkill for a local development environment, but the nice part about that is like now the Kubernetes manifests layer nicely. You've got a local base layer, a local instance, you've got a sandbox instance or a development instance you may launch into the cloud someplace, or you've got your production layers all right in there using Kustomize, for example.
Nice
part about that is if my machine doesn't have enough horsepower or memory or disk space to run a specific project where I need to jump in and help, I can just run that in the cloud. There's nothing saying I have to be running that locally on my own machine. All the tooling, all the file synchronization will work just as well if it's running in a sidecar. Like if I had a big white box Intel machine or machine sitting in under my desk, I could run that, or I can just launch it into DigitalOcean or an AWS cloud. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into Scaff. But before we do, have you seen? I talked about this in the last episode. This new AI computer thing that NVIDIA announced.
I'm pretty excited about that, actually.
I'm super excited. NVIDIA unveils a $3,000 desktop AI computer, and I think it's just you kind of remote in and run containers on it as well. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I was excited because I felt like CES. This is obviously launched at CES by NVIDIA on stage, and I was excited to see CES have something that was interesting for developers again. I feel like CES had kind of gotten boring maybe over the last decade. And this was exciting. I think that
it's got to be all doorbells and TVs. Yeah,
right. Exactly. And I love home automation. Don't get me wrong, but there's only so much of that junk I could possibly be interested in, and this is something I'm very interested in.
Exactly. Well, Jamie out in the audience says totally all in on developing with containers. Very few tools installed on my Mac locally. We're here with you. Awesome.
Yeah, the important tools, like you've got your IDE, your VS Code, you've got your your favorite Git visualization tool. Like those are critical to your tool chain, your workflow, and they should work everywhere. They should work just as work alike on every project you're on.
Yeah, I agree. I don't develop in containers, but I work with local virtual environments and then like basically try to replicate exactly the same. But all the surrounding stuff, all the daemons and the servers and all that is all like, so we're at a slightly different stage of our container journey, I believe, but we're both far down the path, I think.
Much further than we used to be. That's for sure.
Oh, certainly much further than I used to be. All right. Here we are, 6 feet up /Scaff on GitHub.
Yep.
Scaff provides developers and DevOps engineers with a complete blueprint for a new project using Kubernetes. We talked a lot about the motivation and so on, but let's start with the beginning. You said, I have an idea for a project. I want it well structured. So this is a little cookie cutter-ish in a sense but what it makes is more than just a Python project, right? Tell us what we got here.
So this started out, if you've ever followed the cookie cutter project, there was a cookie cutter Django template out there made by Pydanny. It kind of kicked that off and started it. I liked a lot of his opinions, but I wanted more to it, or I wanted to change some of them. So that was the original like kind of kernel of where this started. And then we grew a lot more around the deployment story and some of the developer tools so that we could be on Kubernetes. We could standardize on Kubernetes as a container platform. So we could launch into any cloud, whether it's a managed Kubernetes or whether you're bare metal or running like VMs and EC2, or it doesn't matter. Because the nice part about Kubernetes is it gives you that agnostic interface to launch new containers. I think a lot of people see Kubernetes as complex and used for like container orchestration and scaling, but I see Kubernetes as a way, it's an interface, it's an API to allow us to deploy easily. So we wanted to focus on things like CI/CD, and could you make that simple? So Scaff includes opinions around Argo CD, for example. So when you deploy into Sandbox, it deploys the Argo CD operator, and then it sits and watches your repository for changes. So anytime you merge to the dev branch, for example, it will release to Sandbox, and then the QA team can go test. And you don't have to think about it. Like I make a PR. If it gets reviewed and accepted and merged, the release happens. Like no one forgets to do the release. No one has to do manual steps to do the release. Long gone are the days of shelling into a box and doing a git pull or SVN up in a directory and then forgetting to restart some service to pick up those changes. Because humans, we're humans. We're terrible about repeatability and maintaining and being able to do maintenance type tasks like that. We're just not built for it. We're built for creative type thinking. So we should let the computers do the bits they're good at, which I feel like that's what some of these opinions are based around. Is can we automate those pieces away? Right.
It's like a deployment checkbox.
Oh yeah.
Checklist. And it's like check. Have we installed this? Do you set this version exactly?
Yeah. And some humans are good at checklists. Like there's people who that is their thing. Like doctors in
Don't take their
surgery,
checks from them.
right?
They're
Like
gonna.
they love their checklists and glad they've got them. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
people who have gravitated towards software development are craftsmen, like kind of artisans about a craft. And it's not so much about checking checkboxes as it is how do they creatively solve a problem, because a lot of the problems they're solving haven't existed. If they existed already, they would be solved, and what would be the point of us writing any software?
Yeah, and that's why we have that. It works on my machine
Yeah, totally.
certification program because because we don't check the boxes, and we're not amazing at
Yeah.
making everything work the same. But yeah, it's
And this is my goal is the getting rid of the works on my machine. Like it should work everywhere exactly the same, and you should be able to use your own machine for development. Like I've seen a lot of teams where they have this big central server that's called dev, and that's where they all shell into and work simultaneously on a single spot, and that just feels fraught with errors and terror to me.
yeah. You know what it feels like? It screams to me is you might end up. It doesn't work on my machine. It only works on that machine.
Exactly. Even worse, it only works on that
I
machine.
once worked on a research project with pretty big funding organization, and there was a bunch of different contractors, one of them out of Seattle, and we all had to build some pretty complex software. The team I was on, we built something that kind of coordinated all of them, and it was fine. It worked great. We were all happy. The other people all delivered. But there was this one team, they had built something on a big Linux server and big fat desktop thing. Why do I know the size of it? Because they had worked on it for 9 months, and then they tried to get it to run on another. They literally could not get it to run on any other computer, and so they put it into the most fragile or most careful shipping container they could, and they drove it from Seattle to San Diego, and they set it up in the corner because they literally couldn't get the software they wrote to run on any other system. Could you imagine? Like, what are you going to do in the next time around? What if it breaks?
Right.
Yeah, that I'm working on a big central server. Maybe there's a way to like restore it and stuff, but you could craft your software into a corner on that big server where it's like, well, we're going to move to the cloud. Like, no, we're going to keep it on that thing, and it better just be enough, you know?
Right. And how do you onboard someone new to help you? Like you gotta be like, well,
Yeah.
be very, very careful. There's this only one server where it only runs.
Oh my
like,
goodness. could you
onboarding
imagine?
is such a challenge there.
Yeah.
Like, you want to be able to onboard developers like with confidence, and they can have the confidence to know that they can make mistakes and they can burn things to the ground and they can try stuff, knowing that it's not going to affect like the production machine or even the sandbox machine. Like they can experiment with a little bit of reckless abandon, because that's how you learn. Like you break things in my mind, you break things to learn. Like there's a lot of learning that happens when you get to break things, and if you can break things confidently, knowing that no big deal, I can just git pull or put a branch and delete that branch and start over.
100%. And there's different layers at which people should embrace that to the maximum. They should embrace that in refactoring and reorganizing, right? So if I have Git and I have frequent check-ins, I should be able to go crazy. You shouldn't be like, oh, don't mess with that. You should be able to go crazy on your code and go, oh my gosh, it's better, or that was a horrible idea. Revert. Exactly. We're
Get rid of that.
And it should not be terror. It should be like, oh, let's give that a try. I bet that would be awesome. And if it's not, we're gonna get out. Also, though, on the containers give you that for your infrastructure locally and in the cloud. What if we ran on the newest version of Postgres?
Yep, let's try it.
Is that amazing, or is it a horrible idea? Like,
let's try it.
If you got the one server that everyone's using, you're definitely, or even a QA server, you're like, we're not going to break everyone because there's 10 people who are going to lose their productivity if we screw this up. But I can change a number in a Docker file, rebuild and try it.
And I've seen this in action, like in production, in action, with our own customer stuff, where a junior sysadmin was doing some standard maintenance activity. Maybe they accidentally dropped the database. But if you have all the things lined up and all the infrastructure set up in this kind of optimal way, it's no big deal. It's like no problem. Like you go run the command that like restores the DB. Like for example, one of our opinions in here is Cloud Native PG. So you have options. Like we can use Cloud Native PG in the cluster, and that does things like point in time restores, recovery. You can be using RDS. those opinions can happen afterwards. But given that the whole thing can be blown away and redeployed in a moment, in literally a moment's notice, gives you a lot of confidence in being able to bring something back from a destructive action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're both so excited about this. We keep getting on tangents. I originally wanted to ask you kind of, how do I get started with this? Like, talk us through. Talk us through. Like,
you'd like to try it?
Yeah, give people a sense of like, if they don't, obviously most people don't have this already. Like, what do they want a new project? They wanted to have this more forward looking.
Yep. So on that
structure, how
page,
do they go?
Yeah, on that GitHub page, there's a one-liner. You can just copy paste into your terminal. I think it's there it is right there. Yeah, there's a little
I applaud you for not having the dollar at the beginning. Thank you.
I'm
dollar
pragmatic,
command,
I'm pragmatic about this. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that one-liner will install a lot of the opinions. I've mentioned this before to some people that Scaff gives you all those kind of cool opinions, cool tools, like neat techniques that as a developer, like it takes like decades to refine and hone and kind of gain into your toolbox. Scaff tries to give those to you like right away. Like, so for example, it's going to install kubectl and kind and tilt and a couple other tools if they're not found on your system. And it'll use, if you've got Homebrew installed, it'll just use Homebrew out of the box to do that. And it puts it into your home directory. It shouldn't require, one of my goals is not to require sudo anywhere in this process. There's no sudo needed here for that curl command to run. And so it should be less impactful on your system than a lot of other tools, but it gives you a lot of power for what you are installing. So you run that one-liner, it will now give you in like your .local bin directory a Scaff CLI command that you'll be able to run, and you can just run Scaff and then the name of the project you want to build, and it'll ask you some questions. So this is the kind of cookie cutter part at that point, is that it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to build a Django app with a Next.js front end? And do you want to use Sentry? Do you want to have Celery? Just some standard questions. What mail provider are you going to use? So it gives you then on your file system a new, in this case, a Django project. I'll talk about some of the future vision pieces of that, but that's what it gives you today. And it also gives you, in addition to a standard Django project, because you could get a Django project just by running the Django start project, a Django admin start project command. It would blow out a very simple version of a Django project. But this has more to it. There's some opinions about like users and sites and some other things. But not only that, there's going to be all the Kubernetes manifests for running locally. There's going to be Terraform in there for deploying into a sandbox cloud, like on Amazon, for example. So if you chose Amazon as your target cloud, there's going to be all these kind of other opinions in here. What database we're using, what if we're using Celery, if we're going to use Redis. Actually, we should change that. We're changing from Redis over to Valkey at the moment as well.
Valkey? What is this?
So Valkey, Valkey.
Close.
Valkey, which is the Redis.
Valkey. Okay.
The Redis replacement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why this?
Just because of licensing changes on the Redis side of things. I think that's another we could do a whole other podcast on just open source licensing and interesting history. The Elastic folks did this with Elasticache. I think the Redis folks kind of were following suit, but then
Mongo did maybe a little bit as well.
Well, and you've seen the Elastic folks kind of go back on that, heading back toward the more open source licensing. We'll see.
Look, I'm sympathetic for
totally.
At least some of these, because they built these businesses, and then the cloud folks are just like, awesome, we'll host that for you, thanks. Like, wait a minute, we were hoping to kind of have some kind of
be that.
Yeah.
For you.
I can also totally understand. Like, no, we just want this stuff unencumbered. It's not that complicated. Probably we could make this work. And we got together and teamed up, and okay, this is news to me. This is awesome.
Yeah, no, it's drop-in replacement for the most current version of Redis.
Okay. I was actually just thinking about doing something with Redis, but I think I might just do a little Norse legend type of stuff instead. Try that out. Russ out there asks, Wagtail?
Not yet. I don't believe we have a Wagtail template, but I'll talk about that in the roadmap because that's coming.
I guess it's worth.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I guess it's worth pointing out to people that this is sort of at its core a Django philosophy, right? Currently? Okay.
Currently. We have some other use cases that we want to be able to satisfy with Scaff as well. For example, instead of deploying into a cloud and like you've got Argo CD watching for like continuous deployment type stuff, what if you were deploying an appliance like into someone's data center and there were different concerns around security and updates and adopting updates and how it got updated? We want to be able to support that use case. I would love to be able to support a fully serverless, Scaf Lite type environment where maybe we're using Lambdas and DynamoDB and API gateway to deploy the backend in a totally serverless manner. Scaf should be able to support that too. It's not there yet. That's the roadmap piece for sure.
Okay. There probably is some, I'm not totally up on it, but there's probably some open source Valkey equivalent Docker-based Lambda type stuff as well that you might be able to say, we want to have a self-contained serverless as part of this.
Yeah. For example, the Scaff challenge. So if you went to DjangoCon last year, 6 Feet Up ran a Scaff challenge where see how fast you could basically run and get a running Django project on your machine in Kubernetes, running locally, ready to develop. The winner did it in 26 seconds from running Scaff to Django actually ready to respond to HTTP requests.
Wow.
That backend that tracked it was all done in Dynamo, Lambda, and API Gateway using the SAM framework. And so on Amazon, there's the serverless application framework that they've got called SAM, which is really nice because you can run it all locally. You just do SAM serve or whatever, SAM start, and it spins up containers locally. You spin up your Dynamo container locally. So I had the whole thing running on my own machine, much in the way that's why I like about Scaff is it all runs locally. It all is contained, and I can play with it. I can destroy it. I can make mistakes, and then when I'm ready, I make a pull request.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm always apprehensive about is building apps that have to have lots of cloud services constantly active, right? And not just because I want to be able to say work in a coffee shop with poor internet connectivity or on an airplane or something like that, but also I feel like there's probably some leakage. I mean, I just heard an ad on some podcast about it for a company whose job is to go and look at all the AWS or Azure stuff you're doing that you might have left running and is costing you $10,000 a month because people just forgot about it. They'd be like, "Oh, let's try this."
Funny you should say that. We've had that.
Oh, really? Tell us a story.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. That's another reason again for parts we're adding into Scaff around like compliance and cost controls. I'm a big fan of an open source tool called Cloud Custodian, which is a event-driven cloud compliance tool. So if you haven't checked it out, Cloud Custodian is a really cool, great tool for compliance, but also FinOps, like making sure your dev instances aren't running 24/7 when they really only need to run probably 8 hours a day. They don't need to run on weekends. Like Cloud Custodian can shut those things down. So that's something we're adding into Scaff right now is some minimum set of things, like make sure any cloud resources you get deployed are properly tagged. Are they tagged with an environment like production or development? Are they tagged with a cost center or whatever your policies may be? But that will help you avoid those kind of instances where we had, for example, someone spun up a Spot instance. Well, if you're not familiar with Amazon, you can request Spot instances, which are kind of excess EC2 VMs that are hanging out, and if someone releases one, you can pick it up and use it cheaper, and they're typically meant to be used temporarily. But you request them, and they come asynchronously to you. So you could go into your console and request one, and if it doesn't come right away, you'd be like, shoot, that didn't work. And you could take off, go get a coffee and get lunch, and until you forget you requested a Spot instance for a giant GPU, whatever.
And then it's ready.
And then it'll show up later in the day. And if you don't go and turn it off, you'll pay for it for the month, which was $10,000 for one of them once that happened to us.
Wow.
So putting in place the fact that if someone did spin up an instance like that, Cloud Custodian would be watching for it and would shut it down within a day if it didn't follow whatever your policy is for starting up new kinds of instances.
That's really cool. We're learning about a lot of cool open source tools here. This is great.
And that's why they're all packaged into Scaff, because not everyone knows about all these things. So we're trying to take like our kind of cumulative 6 feet up journey of 25 years of being on the internet and deploying software and developing software and packaging those opinions into like one spot where it's kind of
I
like
see.
someone took our brains, collective brains, and put them into a code repository, and now we can deploy and develop like we've been doing it for 25 years.
Yeah, it's like, well, that was a really sharp edge. Let's see if we can.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So somebody's like, guys, sorry, but there's a big bill. And
There was a big bill. Look, I'll give a shout out to Amazon. I contacted them, and they did refund us for that accidental big bill. They're generally pretty good about it if you make that mistake once. Now you got to make sure you show them, you can demonstrate to them you've put in place things to not have it happen again.
Okay, because you might pay for it again. Yeah, I honestly, work in the cloud is super scary in that regard. When it's overly automated. So one of the things, speaking of deployments and all this, that I do when I'm working on my Docker stuff is I'll set up a Docker compose file. That's kind of my Zen right now.
Yeah.
And in there, you can set deployment limits. Like, this container can only use so much CPU. More significantly for me, usually, it's like this container can only use 1 gig of RAM, even though the server's got 16. Tell it has 1. And the reason that I think that's super useful is, something goes crazy or starts using too much memory or something like that. You could say, oh, there's something going on here, without it taking down everything else. And there's other things, especially databases.
Yep.
They're like, oh, I've got 16 gigs. I'm just going to load everything into memory because that'll be more efficient. Like, no. You're sharing this with everyone. Could you just load the indexes into your 2 gigs and we'll be good, right? Is there stuff like that here?
Yeah, exactly. And our opinions on that are in the Kubernetes world. You could be able to put in resource limits and priorities. This actually also literally happened to us. Again, all of our experience you get to benefit from. If you aren't careful with Kubernetes,
I think every one of these should have a little double dagger thing. You click on it. Here's the horror story why this is.
Here's the story why this is here. Here's the story why this is here, because that's the truth.
Okay.
But if you don't use resource limits on Kubernetes, they will absolutely stomp on each other. Kubernetes is an amazing orchestrator, and it will do exactly what it's told. And if you've told it that this doesn't have limits, it will give it all the things all the time. And you can run into a situation, for example, if you're using Cloud Native PG, your database is in the cluster, which means it's orchestrated by the cluster. If you don't give it any limits and you're running multiples and you do a backup, the resources when you do a backup go up tremendously.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, if you do it basically like scans through all of the data, and you're
all
like,
the things.
Why is it using 3 gigs? It was using just 1. Oh, because I asked for a full backup. 100%.
Well, and I tell you what it'll do is it will consume all the resources on one node, and then it'll fail over orchestrated. It'll fail over to the second node, and then use all the resources on the second node, and then it'll corrupt your database and crash the whole thing. Now, if you put in the resource limits and the priorities, because what it should do is it should go off and be like, there's a lot of Django instances running that probably don't need to be. I can kill those first. I can save resources. I can orchestrate smartly for you, only if you smartly configure it.
Right. Here's my goal, is to not let this get out of control. Help me with that. Don't just feed it everything. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of these servers are like, we could do better if we could just we could load up more and pre-cache more, but they don't work well together like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're greedy. They're going to try and take at the resources they need to do the job they need to do, but they can be told to be less greedy. And Kubernetes is how we do that with the
more important, they can be forced to be less greedy.
you need to stay in line.
What you got? You're not getting more. All right, let's talk through the building blocks here. You mentioned a couple of them, but there's a big long list of things that I think is going to be pretty interesting to people. Starts with Django.
Yeah.
And then let's go down the building block. When I make an app like this, it has an opinion, it looks like, as well. It's not just a vanilla Django app.
Correct. Yeah, you could be doing asynchronous tasks, so that's why there's a celery opinion in there. Like we if you've got a project, you're going to have jobs in the background. Sure, let's get celery installed. If you're doing something with a fancy front end and you like React, our opinion is really to use Next.js. And if you install Next.js, you'll get like the Strawberry GraphQL stuff out of the box, which is kind of nice. And Apollo on the front end, if the Next.js is also chosen. So some GraphQL opinions have been made, and the plumbing laid to make it just work, which is kind of hard sometimes. So if you diving into a new technology like React and GraphQL, it's nice to have some opinions and to have them pre-wired up for you, so you can just kind of follow the pattern that's already been laid for you.
Okay. I'm told that Next.js is really, really popular.
Yeah,
Tell us
and I think
what
Next.js
isn't Next.js.
Yeah, I mean, Next.js is a set of opinions around React, much in the way that, for example, like Zope and Plone were opinions around how to do a Python web framework. Next.js is kind of a packaging of some opinions about how I would deploy and write React applications and keep them up to date. For anyone who's done a React application, you can start with the standard React demo application, but from there you start adding on it. Again, I'm definitely not the Node, TypeScript, JavaScript front endy person, but dependency spaghetti mess will happen very quickly in this world, or can happen very quickly in this world,
Yeah.
which will lead you into a spot where it's really difficult to upgrade your React application to get all the dependencies upgraded. And there's security vulnerabilities and issues you need to be aware of, and performance things. So you want to make sure you can stay on top of those versions. And Next.js is basically a set of guidelines and opinions that should help guide you down a more happy path. And that's why we chose it. And I think even the React folks tend to suggest using Next instead of just React on its own, because you get those opinions and should have an easier time keeping things up to date.
Yeah. I know the JS stuff feels like it's so complicated, but it's, again, because we're asking
a lot.
And more.
People
we're asking more and more.
People have high expectations of the web applications that they interact with on a daily basis. It's just a fact of life. People have expectations about how things are going to behave and the experience they're going to get.
Yeah, they're like, Gmail's cool, Google Maps is cool. Can ours do that? Like, hold on, right? You realize this is a static website.
You have any developers behind that?
Yeah.
And then if we keep kind of going down this list, I mean, we've standardized on Postgres, and that's historic. We probably 15 years ago, and that was back in the days of MySQL silently dropping data on you. But I don't think
you got enough. I mean, you got enough of your data kept. It's like, there's a lot.
Right, it's exactly what it was. So we switched to Postgres and haven't looked back. And there's just a lot of exciting things happening there. So if you're not on Postgres, I highly recommend it.
Good bet there, because if you look at the surveys and stuff, like the majority of people are doing that, especially if they're doing relational databases. Like it's Postgres, and then you better justify why you're not using Postgres, I think, these days.
And then if you're going to run Postgres and you're running Kubernetes, you're going to want to have some kind of an operator to manage it for you, because you want to have high availability, you want to have data backups, and that's what Cloud Native PG gives you. You can back up into S3 buckets, or you can back up into, you name it. There's multiple kinds of targets that are supported, but it manages all that hard complexity for you. If you've ever set up Postgres replication and high availability on your own and had to deal with all the wall files and moving them around and backing them up, it's a sophisticated beast, a complicated, sophisticated beast, and no one wants to deal with that. And that's what Cloud Native PG does for you. It gives you kind of a UI and a way to configure it, and away you go. And
then after that, we have Valky.
Yeah, Valky, which is our Redis drop-in replacement. If you're not using Redis in your Django apps, you should be. Even if you're nothing more than just the Django template cache, I would turn that on. We've been using Mailhog for our email locally. So this is a local developer tool. Allows you to simulate email being sent off of your development instance without actually sending email anywhere. But
it's a little bit like mocking email.
Yeah, it's super nice. It runs an SMTP server. It gives you a web UI. It looks like real email. It gives you an inbox, so you can basically see what your end users are going to see. Argo is the CI/CD product. So that's open source GitOps. So it watches your repositories, kind of tracks the status of the deployments.
So you basically pick a prod branch or something like that, and you push the prod, then magic happens.
Yeah, Argo does the magic behind that. You can see that it also gives you a bit of insights into your cluster, what's running, what's being deployed, what state they're in. It handles all the like blue-green, rollout of new code, new pods and new containers into your clusters. It's
you probably can set up a QA cluster as well.
Yep.
Right. You just pick a different branch and have it watch that, right?
Well, that's what we do. So inside the Scaff built skeleton you get on your file system, you're going to have a Kubernetes manifest directory that has a base set of manifests, which are, this is what's needed to define the deployment and the services and all the bits. And then each environment, for example, like the sandbox environment, has an Argo running that will be watching for sandbox changes, and the production environment will be watching for production changes. Another thing we standardize on here that's not listed is things like sealed secrets. So you can check in your secrets to your Git repository for sandbox, for example, but the only machine on the planet that can decrypt them is the sandbox instance, because you actually use the sealed secrets operator to do the encryption.
Yeah.
And the only way it can be decrypted is if those things are sitting in that cluster, in the sandbox cluster or in the production cluster.
Yeah.
So what's nice is the sandbox cluster cannot decrypt the production secrets. So you can have, obviously you want to have different secrets for production than you do for sandbox. So you can have least privilege. Developers have access to maybe more unfettered access to sandbox, but they may have more limited access on production. And tools like sealed secrets and customize and Kubernetes manifests and sealed secrets actually make all that work.
Okay. Yeah, that's news to me as well, this one. I love it. I do something similar with my things as well. Like, I know a lot of people have huge environment variable definitions of all their. I'm like,
yeah,
you just need one value that unlocks the other. Like if
all
you
the
have
others.
like highly encrypted stuff.
Now, for someone actually asked a question I'm getting ready to answer, which is about external secrets and services for those things. Local development, we have an opinion around using 1Password for all of our secrets management, whether it's like passwords for websites or API keys, or in this case, development environment, database passwords, development environment, secrets, like Django has a secret, Django secret in there, things like that. Those are actually, in our case, environment variables, and we use the 1Password command line tool to only decrypt them ever in memory. So when you run like the Django start, or like anytime you run the Kubernetes cluster locally in kind, it will feed those environment variables via the config map into your cluster so that it can access the database in the cluster locally. So even locally, you have a long random unknown password to you that is, but actually stored in 1Password. So if you want to go use your, like I use Postico as a GUI for accessing my local Postgres, I can use that. I can actually feed it the data from 1Password and actually access my services. So locally using 1Password and environment variables and config maps, but when going to Sandbox, we just use sealed secrets on Sandbox and production for mostly cross-platform consistency. You could be using, SSM parameter store on Amazon or secrets manager on Amazon, but then that won't work on Google or won't work on Azure.
Yeah.
And so we just standardize around the sealed secrets for ease of deployment to any cluster in any platform anywhere.
Yeah, the 1Password new CLI stuff and SSH
so nice.
secret provider, whatever you call that thing. Yeah, it is super nice. Yeah.
Yeah, if you've not turned on the SSH keys for your 1Password CLI, I have no secret keys, no SSH keys, no API credentials. I have no secrets on my file system unencrypted. They're living in 1Password, and 1Password proxies that access when needed.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I feel like I should maybe embrace that more. I embrace 1Password a lot, but there's more. There's more.
Well, especially when you're working on multiple projects and multiple environments, and you want to have that least privilege access. You don't want to have a one key to rule them all. You want to have keys that get you access to Sandbox, keys that can get you access to production, and you want to be able to give only certain people access to those production keys, and only certain people access to Sandbox keys. And we actually do that with so we're a Microsoft 365 shop. We use Microsoft's Entra directory service, which is their Azure Active Directory product, and we use security groups. And so based on what security groups or what project you're working on gives you access to only certain vaults inside of 1Password, gives you access to only certain accounts inside of Amazon, and those kinds of things are all wired up to our single sign-on platform.
Yeah, very nice. Traffic's
just an ingress controller.
It's like a load balancer type thing?
Yeah, it's a load balancer kind of cloud. If you rethought about a web server and it was cloud native and containers and understood clusters like Kubernetes clusters, this is what Traffic is.
I see. So maybe a better analogy would be like Nginx or
I mean, I think we all grew up on Nginx, and made it do all the crazy reverse proxy things. Like Traffic is the born in the cloud native world version of that. Now, Nginx has their own ingress controller as well that they've rewritten to be more cloud native. That's just what Traffic is for us. Cert Manager, again, handling things like TLS certificates and renewals and you name it. Cert Manager makes sure that everything's got
how's that
HTTPS.
different than Let's Encrypt and Certbot and things like that?
I mean, it's really similar in those cases. I think actually Cert Manager, I think it's using Let's Encrypt under the covers. I could be wrong on that one.
Maybe more cluster focused, because that can be a real challenge.
Well, because a lot of again, another beauty of Kubernetes that I don't think a lot of people talk about is the operators. These are like, kind of extensions or plugins to the Kubernetes cluster that give you superpowers to do things like make sure the certs are always, renewed, make sure the latest code is always deployed, make sure the database is highly available and backed up, make sure, that's what these operators do in the Kubernetes world, is they're like just plugins to your cluster that give you these extended capabilities.
Okay.
And that's what Cert Manager is. It's another one of those. So that handles the certificates and ingress routes. That's all like kind of Traffic, Cert Manager, certificates. It's all.
Yeah, it's all together.
All together.
Won't give you the certificate unless it can prove that certificate, that domain routes back to that thing. And yeah, it's great, but it does get a little complicated in Docker already. And then I can imagine an auto scaling clusters.
Right. Oh, you want it all just to work.
Yeah, you don't want the certificate expired. Warning, danger, do not proceed to this website. Oh, no. All right, we got Prometheus in the house.
Well, and Prometheus and Grafana are kind of together here. It's nice to have observability, be able to see stats and trending data to be able to make decisions on how you're scaling or handling, load. It's hard to predict sometimes what a service is going to do when you go deploy it to real users. Real users have an uncanny knack of pushing buttons and making things happen that produce lots of crazy edge cases.
Right. This part was slow, so I just kept pushing the button. Like, you realize how much more load you put out. It was already slow because it couldn't handle it.
And you'd prefer that about these problems before your users report them to you. So tools like Prometheus and Grafana and Loki. So Loki specifically is log aggregation. Prometheus is going to be a lot of metrics, and we combine those all into like Grafana dashboards. The trick here is, you want to be able to get all the data, but then you got to make something meaningful of the data. And so we try to put in some, default dashboards that give you that if I was stuck on an island, what was the one screen of information I might need to make a business decision about what's happening here, type view of things, and not overload you with too much information. But you want to be able to dive deeper and see, when the database backup kicks in, the IO all of a sudden goes crazy, and that's why we're seeing a dip in here, and that's why there was a failover. Like, being able to trace back those things without data is impossible. And because we're in a clustered world, and there's lots of interdependencies, and these things can scale out. You could have many, many nodes running these tools. You got to have some way of getting I hate to say it, a single pane of glass. I'll put that out there.
I can see my entire business in a single pane of glass, and it is humming smoothly. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure all the
every marketing person is
they all just cringe to like, oh my god, he just said it. He just said it.
Some people cringe, and some people are like, yes, they're speaking my language. Out there, Michael in the audience says the beauty of Cube Prometheus is all of the pre-configured dashboards for K8s out of the box. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many good example dashboards on Grafana that there's no reason not to be using this for observability. And this is like the table stakes. Like, you better start here, and you better just do it. But a lot of people deploy an app, and then they I mean, how many times have you worked with a developer, and they're like, well, something's wrong, and I can't figure out why. And the first thing you tell them, I guarantee you, Michael, the first thing you tell them to do is, did you look in the logs? And they're like, no, I didn't look in the logs. I'm like, well, that's the first thing you gotta do is go look at the logs.
No. That's the second thing you tell them.
What's the first?
The first thing is, do you have logging?
True. Okay.
Yes, I have logging. Okay, did you look at them?
Fair enough.
I was about to ask you though, like, do you have logging set up in this, and do you have like Log Guru, or do you have Logbook, or do you just do Python logging, or what's the story?
Yeah, so I mean, we're using containers, so things should be set up to log as we would expect them in Kubernetes. So kind of like if you've ever looked at the 12-factor app, there's opinions about how logging should happen. That's what we adhere to. Is like the logging should end up in a natural spot where it's easy for us to aggregate with tools like Prometheus and Grafana and actually then action and do something with them. So we typically
you
have
shouldn't
another
have to SSH into other machines to see, well, what's this thing doing? What's that doing? Yeah.
And that's one thing I want to have no SSH into these clusters. Actually, one of our deployment opinions here is using things like Talos Linux for our Kubernetes deployments. Talos does not have a SSH shell enabled. Talos Linux has the ability to launch Kubernetes clusters, so you can use kubectl to manage your Kubernetes, but then you have Talos CTL to manage Talos, and there's no reason to shell into a box. It's just another security surface that you can now get rid of.
Yeah, very interesting. There's a couple of these single purpose Linux distributions out there that are really, really cool.
We've evaluated quite a few, and this is the one we picked. I liked its opinions. I liked its approach. I liked the community that's behind it. One thing when you're picking a lot of these software tools is you need to look at the communities. You need to see how active they are. You need to understand, is this going to be a viable project 5 years from now? Because these are opinions you'll pick now and you'll have to live with for potentially a long time.
That's a great point. Is this going to be your hobby project that you're going to have to keep it running for everyone else, or is this thing got a life of its own? Because I don't need another hobby.
Yeah, exactly. We want this to be for real.
Yeah. Let's do one more shout out of all the building blocks here. Sentry, longtime sponsor and friend of the show.
Yeah. So again, observability tools like this, especially when it comes to like tools like Sentry or even Datadog and New Relic, we just happen to pick Sentry because I like the community. I like the people who are behind that tool. I can't tell you how much time a tool like Sentry has saved us when trying to diagnose and debug performance issues. I know it has lots and lots of features it can do, but when you're looking at a stack and you've got a N+1 performance issue going on with your database queries, and its integrations with Django, its integrations with Redis and Postgres, just make tracking down that kind of stuff so much easier. We again, I'll go back to that 2020, 2021. When we launched LoudSwarm as a virtual event platform space, being able to deliver the schedule to a React application quickly as it's changing throughout the day was actually a big performance challenge. And Sentry highlighted exactly where the problems were. And then we just implemented a simple Redis cache that took us from 90-second generation of the schedule down to like milliseconds. And that's because we were able to pinpoint the issue really, really carefully and really, really closely with Sentry. It bubbles up your problems, and now you just go pick off the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've also used it for error monitoring stuff, and I've more than, I know I say this on the show for some of the ads, but more than once, and this is not an ad, but I've certainly gotten an error, and it's got all the variables of not just the stack trace, but actually the variables of what user ran into the problems and all sorts of stuff. And I've reached out to multiple people, said, I see you ran this problem. I'm really sorry. I fixed it. Give it another try. And I'm sure that's a creepy experience in the one way, but also you're like, geez, that doesn't happen very often. But I fixed it and I know who it is. I might as well tell them like, hey, sorry, you hit this.
Yeah.
Try again.
One tool we've not mentioned here that is not in this list that I think is super important to our Scaff stack is Tilt. That is the local Kubernetes management tool of choice that we have picked. And if you've not played with Tilt, we've gone through different tools along the way. There was one called Scaffold, and I can't remember the other ones we tried. There's numerous ones out there who basically sit in this space and try and solve this problem. But the killer feature for Tilt was two-way sync between your cluster and your local machine. So again, if you're running locally and using Kind, you probably don't notice anything because Tilt is watching your file system, synchronizing your files into the Kubernetes cluster for you to work. But it also does the reverse. One of the key bits I wanted was when you do a compilation of your requirements for your project, you're running Django and you've got a whole set of requirements. If you get into some trickier things like around the data science world, there may be things that compile differently on Mac OS than on Linux than on Windows because they use some slightly different dependencies. That can be tricky when you're working in a container world. So you want to make sure you're doing your pip tools compile via UV, but your pip tools compile in the container, in the target environment of where this is going to be deployed and built. because you'll get different results if you ran that pip tools compile on your Mac as opposed into the Linux VM or Linux container.
Yeah, that's true.
So
they don't pick the platform specific wheels. Yeah.
Yeah. So that tools like Tilt makes sure that I can run my thing in the container and the result of it synchronizes back to my file system. And then I check that into the repository. That was a key bit there. And again, it has a lot of other cool things, nice UI. Like if you fire up Scaff, at the very end of it, it'll tell you, congratulations, you got a new project on your file system. CD into your project and just type tilt up. You type tilt up and you hit spacebar, I think it is, and it launches a web browser with all the status of all the containers that are running locally. You can see all the logging. You can Tilt watches for changes to your local file system for the code. Tilt watches for changes to the Docker files. If you change the Docker file out from underneath Tilt, like while you're developing, say you're adding a new layer or new dependency or something that's needed in Docker, not in your Python, Tilt will rebuild the container immediately for you, like without you having to do anything. Like you just code along and Tilt keeps up.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
it's a little bit like setting your unit test to run on every save type
exactly.
Of thing.
It is, and it's fast. Sometimes you barely even notice. Like if you're working at a very late layer in the build, those builds can happen really, really quickly because most of the stuff's cached. There's another set of opinions. We've really tried to finely tune all the caching in the Docker files and all the layers so that these images build fast, they build slim, they use caches. So if you've got if you're running locally, it's going to cache things locally in your file system. If you blow things away and start over again, it doesn't take forever to download all the stuff. It should be pulling from your local cache.
Yeah, that's a big shift when you're doing container type stuff.
Oh man, because some folks may have a not great experience with containers because of the size of some of these things and because they're not effectively using caching. This is a game changer.
Right. It 100% is. And just maybe potentially just reordering or splitting up commands can make 10x difference in speed.
Well, and you were the one who convinced me to switch over to UV inside their container builds as well. And that absolutely sped things up. Speed is a feature. I know you had that interview with Charlie, and that was one of the things that came out of that stuck in my head is speed is a feature. And I take that everywhere with me. Yeah,
that's awesome. It's a cheat code for sure. It's like, oh, we could just do 10 times. Well, let's try that. That's awesome. And then, you can layer on more caching on top of that and make it even more ridiculous.
Totally.
All right. I think that's probably it for the time to talk through this. What a cool project you got here. Let's close it out with a roadmap.
So we got a lot of things coming. One of the big ones is a big shift from using cookie cutter, which I've mentioned already, to using Copier as our underlying templating product. The big
tell people what Copier is.
Yeah. So Copier is like cookie cutter. Actually, it's a drop-in replacement for cookie cutter. You can use your cookie cutter templates you've already built with Copier, but now you can actually modularize them and upgrade them. So one of the problems with cookie cutter was it was kind of one and done. Like you blew out your template onto the file system, you've got your code. That's the last time you would touch cookie cutter. But if new opinions come around, which we're constantly adding new opinions to Scaff about how we do dev and how we do deployment, you would want those to roll back into old projects that had been built with that same tool. Copier enables this. Copier now allows us to rerun against an existing project and adopt new opinions that have been made from the source template. And that's another change we're making is we're actually allowing Scaff to have multiple template types. So right now, the Scaff kind of runs in a full stack Django app mode. We're going to have the Scaff Lite version, which is maybe serverless. We're going to have the appliance mode, which would enable not using Argo CD, for example, but different ways of updating. We'll have opinions that are not Django necessarily. They may be more data pipeline versions of your apps. And so those will be templates that can be updated and redeployed and kept up to date with Copier.
That's cool. Yeah, I can see a whole concept of this for ML workloads and data science workflows. And we don't necessarily need a web app exactly. What we need is data ingestion and ETL, and we want results, either a notebook or just something in a database on the other end of them.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's another thing that is included in Scaff Opinions is the CI pipelines, like GitHub Actions, Bitbucket workflows, or whatever their CI thing is called, because those are important. Those need to be there. Those need to be there day one. because they're so hard to tack on later, or you just get
Yeah.
busy and you don't tack them on when you should have.
Yeah. It's good to have all these all this experience and all these rounded off rough edges put together in one box for you. It's very cool. All right. Well, we're certainly out of time, Calvin. So how about we got two things to close this out, unlike normal. So let's close it out with a final call to action. People are interested in Scaff.
Yeah,
They
should definitely
they start it.
Yep, go to start it.
I got to log in apparently.
Yeah, go hang out. Go to the 6 feet up /Scaff GitHub repository. It's a one-liner to install. I would love to hear your feedback. Any feature requests. Any bugs you find. We've worked really hard on ironing out a lot of those issues over the last year as we kind of push toward DjangoCon last year. It's amazing and mind-blowing to see how fast you can get a Django project up and running on your own machine with Kubernetes in the mix.
And maybe people need a little background information. Like they're like, I've heard of Kubernetes. What do I do with it? Like, you got good resources for them to.
On YouTube, there's an excellent YouTuber. I can't remember. Her name's Nana. So if you just search Nana and Kubernetes, she does an incredible job of explaining Kubernetes to everybody.
Yeah, I believe it's Nana Codes. No,
yeah,
Tech World with Nana. Yeah.
She's awesome.
She's really good. Yeah, she's really good.
She's really good. Great way of explaining these kind of deeper technology things. That's literally where I went. When I was like, I need to know more about Kubernetes. I went and watched her videos. I've met her in person. She's actually an AWS hero, and she was at reInvent a couple years ago. And just again, superhuman being, doing this for the love of technology.
Yeah, that's
actually
awesome.
I can give a shout out also to one of the people in the chat. Michael Levin is also a prolific YouTuber on Kubernetes.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, I'll put a link to his channel as well. Awesome. All right, well, Calvin, thank you for being here. It's been awesome.
I can't tell you how excited I was about the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been super fun, and I was excited as well. So much so that I've made a theme song for this episode. I'm not going to play it on the YouTube live stream version. It's just the logistics of that are a little bit challenging, but I'll put a link in the YouTube description in a day or two. And when the show comes out, it's going to be at the end. So if you're listening to the MP3 version of your podcast player, be sure to listen to the end. There's going to be a fun
crank it up.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you like Linkin Park and that style of music, you're going to love it. If you hate Linkin Park, maybe call it a show. Anyway, it's going to be super fun. I'll put let's deploy the dream at the end. It'll be a great theme song to round things out. And with that, Calvin, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Bye.